Today, I want to just take a little bit of time and talk about the resources I usually go to when I'm trying to solve a problem on either implementation or, say, I'm trying to solve like an architectural problem or an infrastructure problem. How do I go about solving it, and where do I look up answers for the problems that I'm seeking? It's something which we all go through. We all have to go through a problem solving process, and we all probably have the resources we go to. A lot of us go to Stack Overflow, especially when we're implementing solutions. Stack Overflow, if you guys don't know, is kind of like a forum that's specialized in software development and being able to ask software development specific questions and get responses to them. And there's a huge database of prior questions that probably can relate to the problem you have at hand. And that's why it's such a huge community, and it's such a staple in software in the life of a software developer. But there's a lot of other resources out there, and I just want to kind of make this a raw video here where I'm going to think about some of the most recent problems that I've had and how I solve them. And the reason I want to do that is because Stack Overflow doesn't always have the solutions we need. And if you've been developing software long enough, you've probably realized this when you're trying to solve a complex problem that it's likely someone else has not faced before. And a lot of us do have problems that are unique to our business case or unique to the role we're currently playing. There is no solution that's cookie cutter. So it's hard to find a forum post that gives us an exact solution. You really have to have the knowledge of kind of being able to piece together multiple forums, choices, or forum posts and Frankenstein that solution, or you have to just spend time doing research and figuring out the solution for yourself. So I'm going to go through that, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over to splitting my screen here. So you guys should see my desktop, and I'm going to start off with the number one tool I use when I have problems that I need to solve: Google. What I tend to do next is I search the problem I'm looking for, or I come up with some kind of strategy. So an issue I've been having recently is it's a larger deployed project for a client that we've been working with at my job. And I'm the director of software development, but I'm very, very hands-on. So I write code daily, as well as take on meetings that are at the director level, talking about resourcing and process. And then I also talk with clients and try to resolve issues, which can involve me helping with infrastructure changes or redesigning architecture and software design. So this particular problem was one that I came into. I adopted this one, and there was an issue with the encoding time of a script that we were using at runtime to basically create a video, compile it together with multiple audio files and video clips, and send it out to a let's say a user of this interactive install that just went through that experience. So it's supposed to be kind of a seamless experience that a user would come in, use this interactive exhibit that we made, and then suddenly at the end of it, they're spit out a fully compiled video that's encoded and able to be sent to them excuse me, via email, actually. And the way we were doing it is we're recording a couple of camera feeds that are live on the user, and then we encode them with FFmpeg. And the problem we were facing was FFmpeg, the script we were running, was running really well for a long time on the install, and then we had to replace that computer due to some hardware issues that were occurring. When we replaced the computer, we began setting up the software before deploying the new system, and we found that FFmpeg was not working. The script was no longer working with this new computer that was a clone and configured correctly. And it ended up just being a massive issue. The encoding times ended up dropping from being anywhere between, let's say, 15 seconds to 25 seconds, and went to about a minute and a half, which is a huge issue in the interactive world where users want immediate feedback. They want their feedback to occur within maybe 10, 20 seconds. We were already pushing that limit with a 15-second-ish encoding time. So that was the best we were able to do, but now we weren't meeting that. So I had to go troubleshooting this. A few of us actually did. And I ended up figuring it out, but it took a long time. And it's a very unique case that we had. So originally I thought that maybe my FFmpeg scripts were incorrect. And I went searching around Google for it. So the issue that we ended up finding, or that I ended up really digging into, was looking into GPU acceleration with FFmpeg. If you guys have done any kind of FFmpeg encoding or any kind of video encoding or video editing, if you have Nvidia cards, an Nvidia graphics card in your computer, you can accelerate your encoding times using the GPU, which is your graphic processor. And almost all Nvidia cards use CUDA cores for parallel processing, which is optimized in certain softwares like Premiere or FFmpeg if you're using a binary version of FFmpeg that supports it. So I went around searching. One of the first things I did is I looked up FFmpeg Nvidia support. And as you kind of saw my auto complete here doing, let me zoom in so you could see it. It began giving me the autocomplete suggestions of NVENC, which is the actual, let's say, module that I needed and I was using in my scripts. But let's go ahead and say I looked up NVIDIA acceleration, okay? That took me to FFmpeg's website, and I immediately saw, okay, there's hardware acceleration intro there. This is an NVIDIA link with FFmpeg. So I probably went through this one. Again, I was doing it on my work computer at the time. I'm just giving you an example. But I began reading through this. I ended up going through a lot of documentation to better understand what FFmpeg supporting NVIDIA cards really meant and what the commands were really doing. Because the command, as I mentioned, that we were using was NVENC, which enables the hardware acceleration or the offloading of the encoding paths to go onto the graphics card, which, if you think about it, graphics cards have been improving at a massive rate, right? And depending on your system, in your current build, the CPU is already under load. So if you wanted to allow the encoding to occur on the CPU, it can. That's not a huge issue. You can totally allow it to process on the CPU. But if there's already a load on the CPU from other software running in the background, then being able to offload that processing to the GPU is a benefit. Now, an additional benefit of that is CUDA, which NVIDIA supports. Actually, that's their system, and it's the parallel processing cores on the actual graphics card. And that has been designed to provide really fast parallel processing on the GPU unit. If you think about why there was a big craze in mining the past few years and all the graphics cards were getting bought out, the reason for that is graphics cards have the CUDA cores in them, especially the NVIDIA, only the NVIDIA cards. AMD cards have their own kind of version, or Radeon cards have their own version of acceleration. I forgot what their name was, but all the graphics cards were getting picked up and people were trying to mine with them because of the parallel processing capabilities. The processing that you were doing with the mining was getting offloaded to the GPUs. So you got an array of GPUs running in either an individual GPU mode or combined SLI mode. And then the processing time was basically improved, right? And improved means shortened. So anyways, what we were trying to do is offload the encoding to the GPU. And what it turned out, the problem was, after doing a ton of research, reading through this documentation and realizing that we were actually making the calls correctly, and we were able to do that by comparing the actual kind of generation of technology we were using. So we were actually using Pascal cards for this one. And then we were able to compare to the actual card we were using. We were using an, I think it was a 1050, which let's take a look. I'm pretty sure that's a Pascal card. I don't think it's Maxwell. I think the 900 series were were Maxwell's. Yeah, so 10 series were Pascal's, and the Maxwell's were the 900 series. So we were using the 1050, and it turns out that the driver support on that particular card was causing issues. So there were drivers that should have been installed. They were, but for some reason, the hardware and the drivers were not working properly. We tried to run through updates, and after doing some more research, we found that there were other reported cases. So what we ended up doing to find that is we looked up Nvidia 1050 drivers, no card, no compatible with Windows 10. So I think this is similar to the issue we found. So when we were trying to update the drivers, no updates were being found. Although if you went to Nvidia's website, you saw that there were updated drivers since the version. There were modern versions that were more recent than the version we were using. So we tried to, it failed. So we tried to get the drivers directly. When we tried to install those drivers, no hardware was being seen on the computer. And this continued to be a problem for days. We tried figuring this out. We tried running through a handful of forum kind of tests that we found here. And none of those forum suggestions ended up working. And then we reached out to NVIDIA, and it turned out, after doing all this research, that there was an issue with the card. So by Googling this all in the beginning, we were able to confirm that we were correctly utilizing FFmpeg commands. But the failure point, the reason we weren't able to encode as quickly was because we couldn't accelerate, we couldn't offload the encoding to the GPU properly. And we had to remove those NVENC calls because they were failing to see the hardware when they were getting called. And when we tried to solve it using updated drivers, when we figured out the drivers may be an issue, we were not able to do that because they weren't detecting a card. And we tried to kind of adjust it. We tried to pull the card and reseat it. Nothing worked. So we ended up just doing a return and exchange for the card, right? But that would have been a much longer, more difficult process had we not been able to troubleshoot it. Stack Overflow would not have a solution for this. And then again, this isn't necessarily a programmer problem, but it's an example. So another time that we had large issues, or another time that I end up using Google for a lot of my problems, is if I'm writing code and I'm looking for a solution to one of my questions. So for example, I regularly forget which libraries to use in various languages, and I regularly need to look up certain library calls. So very common source code or types of functionality that we end up needing to use, especially in the world that I'm in, is we need to be able to communicate between software applications either via HTTP or UDP or TCP. And sometimes we're writing applications on the same computer that are speaking to each other within maybe 3-4 different languages, 2 different languages, etc. So we may have a C# application running, like a desktop service running, and then we may have a C# application running in a Unity engine application, and we may have a Python application running, which is maybe controlling some hardware and needs to be able to communicate back and forth. So a lot of the times I'll need to know, okay, I've worked with Python a lot. I know how to write Python code. I don't know the libraries by heart because I don't use Python to solve problems daily. I don't go and create backends using Django daily. I don't do a lot of data science type work with basically the scientific kits and stuff like that, or pandas or anything like that. So when I jump into Python, I need to research those libraries. And what I'll end up doing is I'll go to Google and I'll look up Python UDP library. And in this case, I may need to be able to communicate over UDP because I have a Python server that's running and communicating with some hardware. And the reason I chose to do that is because the libraries already exist and they work fairly well for the problem I need to solve. And then what I need to do is I need to communicate the the updates or the commands to and from the hardware via the Python server to my C#. So I may choose UDP, and I may take a look to see, okay, what kind of UDP support does Python already have? What kind of solutions and libraries exist already? So I'll go and search, okay, UDP communication, there's a Python wiki. So it looks like there's a full library to create sockets. That's great. And this is actually the exact one I came across, and this is actually from Python themselves. So it's their actual support documentation. I don't know if this is Python 2.7 or if it's 3. And I don't know the necessary nuances in the actual source code to know which one is which. This may be 2, and I'm just guessing that based on there not being any parentheses around the prints. I want to say one of them, Python 3 prints, had parentheses in it. Let me just take a look. Python 3 print versus Python 2. Whew. Advanced stuff. Important differences. Let's see. Python 2 print function. Okay, so I was right. So Python 2.x is replaced by a print with parentheses function. So you actually have like a method call to print Python 3, an extra pair of parentheses is required. Haha, I was right. So it looks like, I'm not sure if Python 2 supports it with parentheses already. It's just Python 3 maybe doesn't support it without parentheses. But if one of you guys know, you can leave that in the comments below. I'd appreciate it, and so would everybody else. But in this case, what I'm trying to show you guys is when I need to find the solutions, I'm able to Google them first. Sometimes what this will do is this will lead me to a Stack Overflow situation. And the reason I go to Google first before going to Stack Overflow is when I go to Stack Overflow, if I were to look up Python UDP, I'm going to get a whole bunch of other people's issues and problems. And the first thing that's going to come up is, of course, if you haven't used Stack Overflow, it's the actual like problem statement. That's the header. It's their question. And then their summaries are not very helpful here. What's easier for me to do, and I find to be much more useful, is I Google it. Google's search engine and their crawlers and the way they display the information with a little summary of what the kind of initial paragraphs are, the initial body is, makes this very simple for me to parse the returned or the response and decide if it's an article that I want to take a look at, okay? So if this leads me into a Stack Overflow solution, then great. If it doesn't, then awesome too. Like I said, I actually used this resource, which linked me directly to the UDP communication on the Python server documentation. And that was exactly what I needed. And if I look a little bit lower here in the Stack Overflow response, it actually got me relevant Stack Overflow posts, which actually did help. So at the time, we were using some Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and a whole bunch of other little hardware modules on each. And I'm sure at one point we needed to reference communication between the Arduino and Python using UDP. Now, I don't know why they would use UDP between this. You could just use a serial port over USB or COM port. So that's kind of odd, especially because the Arduino, you'd have to use a module like a shield on it, which enables some sort of network communication to occur. But to each their own. If they wanted to do that, that's fine. Maybe they had an issue with, they wanted this to be a remote Arduino and they didn't want to have it hardwired to a system. In our case, we were able to hardwire. Yeah, I see it right here. They use an Ethernet shield here. So this could have helped out at the time, but we didn't need this exact situation. What we had was a service running on the same computer. We needed to communicate between that service and another process. We decided to use UDP for that communication. So that was an easy way to do it. We did not need the Arduino to communicate with our computer over Python. We set up as just reading over the COM port over USB, and that was perfectly fine. And the other thing we ended up needing to do is we wanted to write a UDP server, which was the service we ran. And to figure out how to do that, I actually have a good amount of experience doing that. What I would have done the very first time I looked up how to kind of create UDP servers and TCP servers in C# is I would have looked it up like this. So I would have looked up generally what is a UDP server in C#. Here comes some Stack Overflow references. I tend to gravitate towards finding documentation first. So I probably would have looked this up. UDP class is the actual class in C# you're going to want to use. That's a part of .NET Sockets, I believe. So you need to include that library here. And that would give you access to UDP client, and then you can create your actual sockets there, which is a UDP one, and that's how you'd go about it. So, nevertheless, that kind of goes and shows you guys the train of thought I have when I'm trying to solve problems. A lot of the problems I have nowadays will be we have a larger ecosystem of software and hardware that needs to communicate, and it needs to work seamlessly and create a very unified experience for our either clients or the service we're providing. And I have to either architect a solution or design the software so that it works that way. And then I need to be able to provide my team and my developers with support in case they get stuck. I don't always know exactly what they're working on every moment because they will be working on solutions that have been planned for the whole week or the week ahead and for their sprint. And when they come to me, my mind could be on a million different things, but I always try to be there for them and support them. So my go-to is if I need to reference something I don't know off the top of my head, I'm usually pretty good at figuring it out because I've been doing it for a good amount of time now. And I go to Google first. I let Google kind of conglomerate all the resources it can find, and it's scraped over the time. And then I find reliable sources that it provides to me. I don't always rely on Stack Overflow. Sometimes my solution will come directly from a reference documentation that Google kicked out to me through one of the actual product or services websites that has the documentation. Sometimes it will be a Stack Overflow link. I've had some resources be like not HackerRank, Geeks for Geeks. Just kind of some random stuff in there that I referenced and wanted to refresh my memory on. Actually, I've had a few data structures problems where I was trying to either write an algorithm or utilize a data structure to solve some unique problems we were facing. And I needed to remember, okay, how do I write the code for a map and a new hashing function specific to my functionality? And, at that time, I was like, okay, I'm just going to check out Geeks for Geeks to refresh my mind. And it helped a ton. So Geeks for Geeks is a great one. They have some pretty good articles and tutorials here to remind you on a whole bunch of topics. You can kind of see them here on the side. They've got some, oh man, I really zoomed in there. So this is a great website if you just want to refresh on some of those general topics. Most of us know it pretty well. But for example, if you're interviewing with companies, this is a great resource for you. And I guess that kind of segues us into that topic. If you guys are looking for resources for interviewing, there's a handful of resources out there. Google's a great one, but it's not going to really hit on those points that you're looking for in terms of interview process and interview type questions. When you're looking to figure out how to prepare for interviews, a lot of us know that one of the key resources out there and one of the biggest books, you guys are going to give me a second here. One of those key resources is Cracking the Coding Interview. So if you guys haven't heard of that book, that's kind of one of the staples for preparing for programming interviews. It has a series of chapters that talk about what the process is like. It doesn't go extremely into depth of what the process is, but it does cover it. And then what it really goes into depth on is how the technical aspects go. So as a software developer, if you don't know this already, you will be tested on your programming ability at most companies. So you need to prepare for that. That's what that book provides you with. The background on that, okay? There are other books out there you should check out, like there's a book, I think it's Algorithms. Textbook. I forgot what it was actually called. Here it is. It is Algorithm. The Intro to Algorithms. This is a book that I think has kind of become a reference manual for solving algorithms and figuring out their complexity and being able to create your own. And I guess creating your own, not solving algorithms. And This is one of the textbooks I personally have. I bought it back when I was in college. This is what my algorithms course used during my undergraduate degree in computer science. But it's a great book. It looks like you can get some used ones for pretty cheap nowadays. So that's pretty awesome. But those are textbooks which are pretty useful for the interview process. Now, the next things that are very useful are the web-based clients that prepare you, okay? So you should be using those resources like Geeks for Geeks, HackerRank. So let me pull that up, HackerRank. So HackerRank, I've mentioned it before on other videos that I've made, but this is a website that lets you practice coding like you're going to face in the actual coding interviews. The difference is this is a web-based client where you actually get to write the code and compile it online and receive immediate feedback on whether or not your solution is correct. That is a different process from the on-site interviews, because when you get on-site, your interview is generally going to be on a whiteboard or on paper. I don't think I've seen any company do it on paper. Even when I did my Facebook interviews, I think it was a few years ago, my Facebook interviews were all on a whiteboard. And when I interviewed with Google, I've done some online ones, but those were done in a notepad. Facebook, I did it also in a shared like notepad text editor. So both of those were text editor type things. You don't have any kind of IDE, no autocomplete. So that's the difference there. You can practice solving problems to get your brain wrapped around the process and how to solve them and how to think about it and how to use data structures. And also it helps you learn how to write clean code, or not clean, but compilable code, because when you interview and do the technical interviews on whiteboards, or even on the shared text editor interviews you're going to do with the larger companies, they expect you to write as close to compilable code as possible. So doing LeetCode or HackerRank or any of these is helpful. So LeetCode is another one. That's one where I'm already logged in. I think I was showing this on another video recently. This has a ton of little practice problems you can work on. Let's see. And they have them ranked from easy to medium to hard. Generally, if you're going to be interviewing for the larger companies, you should be able to solve almost any of the easy problems without too big of a fuss. And then you should be able to solve at least a handful of the mediums. Generally, I don't think the hard problems are asked in person, because you have to imagine that you're going to have a limited amount of time in each of your interviews. They'll maybe be 45 minutes to an hour. So they try to avoid the hard problems, which will take at least that much time. Medium ones, you can usually solve them within that time. But easy ones should take you maybe 15, 20 minutes, something like that. So these are good sources. There's a handful of other ones out there too, which you guys can check out. I think Codecata is another one. Perhaps that's called Code Wars now. There are some interview mock-up interview websites out there. So interview.io, I think, is one of them. So that's, if you guys haven't checked that out, that's actually an awesome resource. I've done one of these to practice interviewing before too, and it's pretty awesome. They do it for free. You can also go and pay some services to do this, but why not take advantage of it if it's free? You just hop on their website, you log in, and you can actually you could schedule an interview with somebody who will actually do a mock interview for you, and they're actually pretty good. I've been on both sides of that table before. I've interviewed people and I've been interviewed. The last one of these I did. I'll admit I didn't do so hot. I was able to explain the solution pretty well, but it's been a long time since I've implemented trees from scratch, and this was after not having done it and warmed up or practiced at all. I wanted to jump right into a mock interview, and I scheduled one of these a couple months ago just for fun. And I got my butt kicked a little bit, but at the same time, it let me warm up my communication capabilities, and it let me get my brain really churning on how to solve these types of problems again. After that, I continued doing LeetCode, and now I'm a little bit more used to it again. So just to keep my skills fresh, I try to keep this type of practice going regularly. But this is a great resource. I think Career Cup is another one. So Career Cup, I think, is owned or run by the author of, there you go, Cracking the Interview. cracking the coding interview, then cracking the PM interview. So I believe that's Gail. Let's see, Gail Lackman McDowell. So she, I believe, was like an ex-Googler, and she worked at some other tech companies, and she's done a great job kind of creating this resource for all of us. And she also provides those mock interviews, I think, through here. It looks like they also do kind of resume type stuff. I'm not 100% sure if that's the case. They may have. Oh, here we go. So they do resume reviews and mock interviews. Let's see what they're actually supporting there. So, Career Cup resume review. So are they actually charged? Yeah, okay. Search for reviewers here. Okay, so it looks like they have like a library of reviewers, probably people that have worked with larger tech companies, and you can basically pay them to review your resume and give you some tips, etc. And this kind of looks exactly like an Upwork board there. That's kind of funny. But let's see how much these guys charge. So to have a career conversation with Peter here, it would cost $79.20 to have them review and critique your resume and cover letter. You're looking at almost $160, and a mock interview is $160. If you're looking to get hired at a Big 4, Big 5 company, $160 is not a big amount to drop. So it's not that big of a problem. If these people can actually help you learn this information, it may be worth your time. I would not charge anywhere less than that for those types of services. I think those are relatively reasonable, especially if you're going to put in an hour or two to reviewing someone's resume or cover letter and actually provide them with useful critique. Now, my problem with this is I don't know how useful the critique they're going to provide is. I'm suspecting, though, because they've been vetted and they're working with Career Cup and this particular team who does a great job with cracking the coding interview, I'm suspecting they've been vetted and their work is good. So it looks like that's how they do it. I bet you each one of them has their own kind of rates here. So let's take a look at one other person. Yep, so they each have their own rates. This person's kind of $100 and then $200 minimum, depending on what you're doing. So if you don't have the money to spend on this type of thing, check out interview.io that I just showed you guys a few seconds ago. That's a good option. And I think that goes ahead and wraps it up. So if you guys have any questions or comments or any kind of critique, please do leave them in the feedback or leave them in the comments below, or you can email them to me. My email will be posted in the description down below. And if you guys don't mind, please do subscribe and hit that bell below so you guys are notified when my content comes out. I would really appreciate it. Have a good one, you guys.